Chapter 5, Verbal Messages. These are messages that's sent with words, either written or oral. And if you recall from Chapter 1, one of the principles of communication is that messages are generally sent as a package, which means that package of signals, which means that there are verbal messages sent along with nonverbal messages at the same time. But in Chapter 5, we're going to focus on verbal messages. Hopefully, by learning a little bit about the different types of verbal messages and recognizing some concepts that pertain to verbal messages, you'll be able to communicate your meanings the way that closer to the way you want them to be understood, and you can better avoid misunderstanding. So hopefully this will help you a bit. We're going to look at each of the key principles of verbal messages. We'll look at these one at a time, some in more depth than others. The first principle is that meanings are in people. Now, what this means is that the person sending the message may have one meaning, and the person receiving it may perceive a different meaning from it. One common form of this is what we call bypassing. This is when the sender of the message and the receiver of the message miss each other with the meanings of words. So the person saying the word has one idea of what the word means in mind, and the receiver has a different way of understanding the word. Say, for instance, John tells his friend Bill that his girlfriend wants a commitment. Well, John may be thinking she wants him to be her only guy that she dates and the only girl that he dates. On the other hand, Bill may think that John means that, whoa, she wants to get married. Commitment can mean different things to different people in different situations. Context of the communication can change the meaning too. Depending on the situation, the same words can mean different things. For instance, if my son asks for the car Friday night, to use my car Friday night, I might say, no way. And by that I might mean, no, absolutely not. But on the other hand, if my husband comes home and he's won $100 with a lottery ticket, I might also say, no way. And in that situation, I might mean, you're kidding, that's great. Another principle of verbal messages is that language is denotative and connotative. Now, this is a big one. Denotation is the dictionary definition of a word. The connotative meaning is the meaning, the emotional meaning that people may give to a word, a specific person may give to a word. And let's see, we could give a lot of examples of this. Let's take the example of conservative, liberal. If you're a conservative person politically, you might hear the word liberal and think, oh, it's those people who want to give everything away, that type of thing. On the other hand, if you're more of a liberal political person, you might hear the word conservative and think, oh, those are those people who are stingy and they don't want anything to change. Well, those meanings that those individuals have assigned to each of those words are not the dictionary definitions. They are rather the words that the person, an individual, may have assigned to that word through their experiences, their values. Another principle of verbal messages is that language and words can vary in abstraction. Another principle of verbal messages is that messages can vary in abstraction. One way to think about this principle is to contract abstract concepts and ideas, that is, concepts and ideas that have no physical dimensions, contrast those with concrete objects, people, and events, things that we can perceive with the five senses. So when we look at abstraction this way, think of some concepts or ideas that have no physical dimensions. Let's take love. Love is an abstract. We can't put our hands on it. A concrete idea or object or person might be this table. So that's one way to look at abstraction. Here's another way to look at abstraction. We can think of going from the more abstract, that is the larger concept of anything in life, to a more specific statement. And here's one example. I had I don't know how many of you have ever had job reviews where your boss writes up how you've been doing. Well, a number of years ago, I had a really scathingly bad review from a boss. And if I had known better at the time, I would have asked her some questions to make my review more specific. And as we go through this, I'll explain why it would have helped me to be more specific. So she wrote something to the effect, you need to have a better attitude. Well, better attitude is pretty abstract. So I should have probably asked, what do you mean by a better attitude? And she might have said, well, you need to be more positive. Still not specific enough to really help me. So I might have asked, when am I not positive? She might have said, you need to complain less. So now I might be thinking, well, she thinks I complain too much, but my question is, when do I complain? Well, she might have said, you need to complain less about working too hard. Still might not have been specific enough for me. So I might have said, when do I complain about working too hard? And she might have said, you need to quit complaining every time we have to work late or come in on weekends. So if you look at the original message that she gave me, you need to have a better attitude. Better attitude didn't really give me much to work with. I didn't know when, I didn't know what her idea of a better attitude was. I didn't know when I didn't have a good attitude, that kind of thing. So she went from the very abstract in her message to the much more specific, and I could really do something with it then. Another example, another principle of verbal messages is that messages can vary in directness. Direct speech is very explicit and it leaves no doubt as to the meaning. If you came into class and said, for instance, I need to leave class at 11 a.m. for an appointment, that would be very specific. On the other hand, if you said, I hope we get out of class earlier than 11:30, that would be very indirect. The meaning is implied that you might have something to do or somewhere to go. So being indirect has its pros, but it also has a lot of cons to it. In fact, what is one thing you can think of? One thing you might get in trouble with in using indirect speech. Think about that. Another principle of verbal messages is that messages can vary in politeness. And the book does bring up politeness very often in this edition.